Hello guys. So today I have this snake game that I made. So in order to start it, you just press this button and then you control the snake using the pressure pads on the floor. So if I want to go up now, I just walk forward a bit and it will activate going up. There's quite a bit of delay though, so as you can see it will respond basically one iteration later, so you have to do moves ahead of time, like going down now, such that it doesn't go down directly, but now it will start going down. And we'll get the fruit, which looks the same as the snake. I didn't make a fancy display. And now the snake has grown by one block. So that's basically it. As you can see, it's rather slow. Basically, I could run the clock faster than this, but then the latency of the inputs is even more noticeable and it will be even harder to play the game. Now you can still anticipate stuff quite well and just move ahead of time, and it's quite playable this way, just a bit boring. So in the edit I would just speed up this footage around now so you can actually see me play for a bit. And I have a couple of bugs in this game, so it's not perfect. One bug I will explain a bit later, but then there are also some minor glitches which should theoretically be fixable, but I just didn't feel like bug hunting. I think most of the issues are literally timing based, where because I had to tile multiple of these cells and used repeaters in between, the extra tick messes up timing sometimes in specific conditions, and then there's some like race conditions basically, so those are pretty hard to find and fix. But yeah, it is fully working. Not much more to say about it, so I will just show the rest of the sped up footage. I'm not entirely sure what I died from. Honestly, might have been a bug. Usually you would die when running into a wall or running into yourself. There's no looping. So yeah, here's the wiring for it. As you can see, I try to keep things fairly compact, just as a fun challenge. I initially made a 4x4 version for testing, and then I decided to scale it up to 8x8 for the real game. I actually made sure that you can scale it up to 64x64, but then when I found out it had to run this incredibly slowly, making it any bigger than 8x8 just isn't any fun to play. 8x8 is already kind of boring with the speed. I think I honestly might prefer the 4x4 version, even though it's tiny. So this thing consists of several of these cells, which are 4x4 tileable. As mentioned earlier, I didn't do anything fancy for display. It's purely fully on or off. I could have built in some pattern for an apple and then a separate thing for the snake, but I didn't care enough to do that and preferred keeping it simple. Then in addition to that, there is a randomizer, and that's what limits how far you can stack these, how big you can make the screen, because the randomizer has 6 bits, meaning that it can address 64 cells on either axis, so it can be 64x64. And then there's a bunch of logic to actually power these cells. So I can actually show some graphics to explain how the logic of this game works. The game uses shift registers to track the position of the head on both axes separately. Some simple AND gates are used to check whether the head runs into an apple, and when it does, a new apple is generated and the game signals the body to grow. The next challenge is to make the snake grow. This is rather simple, however. as we can just use a memory latch to keep any cell that the head passes through stay on. Now we have another problem though. We have to make sure the length of the snake stays constant. We don't just want a snake that grows indefinitely. Solving this is a bit harder. First we have to make each cell share some data with its neighbors. It will let them know whether it's currently part of the snake. When a cell is turned on as part of the snake, it will also store the direction it moved in when turning on, or rather the opposite direction. Then after each cycle where no apple was eaten, all cells on the board receive an update. Each cell that's turned on and receives an update checks whether the cell in the stored direction is still on. If it's no longer on, it itself will turn off, shrinking the snake by one cell again. This system, however, has one problem I didn't anticipate. It's possible that the snake grows behind its own tail. This will then result in the snake growing indefinitely afterwards. So this approach clearly still has some difficulties. An alternative approach would be to simply make every cell count how many more cycles it should remain alive. This is a much simpler concept and will work well. The main reason I didn't use this mechanic is that I don't find it as interesting, and it's not as scalable. The approach I took allows for an indefinitely large snake, while the counting approach is limited by the amount of memory cells it contains to keep track of the count. This is however more of a hypothetical problem than a practical one, since the possible snake size grows exponentially fast relative to the number of memory cells. As I ended up making only an 8x8 grid, I would have needed only 6 binary memory cells to support the biggest possible snake on the board. This is actually the approach I took in an old common block version of a snake game I made. I do believe this new approach to be fixable as well, but it would get a little more complicated than the current setup. But I might come back to this in the future and try again. So now that we know how this works, let's take a look at the wiring and what each of the components do. This purple section right here is the randomizer to generate the apple. It simply chooses one of the lines on the y-axis and one down here on the x-axis, and then where it intersects it will create an apple, which is right here in this case. Then down here is a very important part. This blue circuit will store what direction the snake is currently moving in, which will control both the shift registers to actually move the head. So this gray section is one shift register and this one is another shift register for the y-axis and the x-axis. And then this blue circuit here will actually pass the direction up as data such that every cell knows what direction the snake is moving in. Then each cell converts this 2-bit binary number, allowing for 4 states, into a 1-bit hexadecimal number using signal strength. And then this cyan circuit is the main bulk of each cell, and this circuit looks at the neighbor cells and based on the signal strength it receives looks at one of the 4 different cells and outputs whether it's on or off to this section in order to determine whether the cell should be reset when it receives an update. Then here we just have the y and x-axis intersection circuit in order to turn on the cell, and this green section is just to power the 16 lamps using one input signal. And that's basically all there is to it. I will leave a world download in the description so you can actually try it out. As mentioned, it's actually not too much fun to play just because everything is pretty slow, but I think it's a pretty cool project nonetheless. And that's it for me. See you all later. Bye.